Imagine standing on the land your family has cared for generations, only to have a stranger call the cops and claim you don't belong there. That's exactly what happened to me the morning my quiet Montana farm turned into a battlefield with the HOA next door. The morning air carried the smell of damp hay and diesel as the first light touched the mountains. I was standing on the porch of my family's farmhouse, sipping from a chipped mug that had seen better days. It was 6:20 a.m. The hour when the world feels quiet enough to believe it still belongs to you. Asterisk. That's when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but old habits die hard after 15 years in law enforcement. Asterisk, this is 911 dispatch, the voice on the line said. We received a report that you were trespassing on private property. Officers are en route to ask you to vacate. Asterisk, I actually laughed out loud. On my own porch? Asterisk, my name is John Miller, I replied, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. And I've lived on this land for 43 years. Who exactly thinks I'm trespassing? Asterisk, the dispatcher hesitated. The complaint was filed by a resident of Willowbrook Estates. Asterisk, I didn't need her to say more. Through the kitchen window of the largest house across the property line, I could already see her silhouette. Linda Walker, with her ever-present binoculars or manicured hair, catching the light like some kind of suburban crown. Asterisk, when the sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway minutes later, I didn't bother to act surprised. The deputy stepped out, looked at me, looked at the farmhouse, and then sighed. Asterisk morning, John, he said, adjusting his belt. Mind showing me some ID? You know the drill. Asterisk, I reached into my jacket and pulled out my old badge wallet. The silver glint of my deputy's shield caught the morning sun. Asterisk, tell Linda Walker, I'm right where I'm supposed to be, I said. Asterisk, the deputy smirked, nodded, and walked back to his car. He didn't even bother with paperwork. Asterisk across the field. I watched Linda's face pale as she realized her first shot had missed. But I knew this wasn't over. Asterisk, my name is John Miller, 45 years old, divorced last spring, and I came back here to rebuild something that mattered. This farm has been in my family since 1945, and my grandfather bought the land with GI Bill money after returning from the war. He built the barn with his own hands, raised cattle, and taught me how to fix a tractor before I was tall enough to reach the pedals. Asterisk, after 15 years in law enforcement, I thought I'd finally found peace again. The kind of peace you only find in the rhythm of farm life. Sunrise, chores, evenings on the porch, and the company of one stubborn goat named Daisy. Asterisk, for the first couple of years, things were good. My neighbors in Willowbrook Estates. The development that sprouted like weeds next to my land 5 years ago mostly liked having me around. Their kids loved feeding Daisy. They bought vegetables from my farm stand. And some even came over to help bale hay just for the novelty of it. Asterisk, but there was one neighbor who saw things differently. Asterisk, Linda Walker. 52 years old, sharp, bob, haircut, loud perfume, louder opinions. She was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, and the kind of person who believed rules were made for everyone else to follow. Asterisk, her husband. Richard owned the construction company that built Willowbrook. They lived in the largest house, with a lawn that looked like it was combed daily and flowers arranged like they belonged in a magazine. To Linda, my farm wasn't tradition. It wasn't history. It was an eyesore. I'll never forget that Tuesday morning in June when Linda marched across the gravel driveway, heels clicking like a metronome, clutching a manila folder as thick as a Bible. Even Daisy, chewing lazily near the fence, stopped to stare. Asterisk, Mr. Miller, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. I'm here on official HOA business. Asterisk, I wiped my hands on my jeans. Linda, I don't think I'm part of your HOA. Asterisk, her laugh was sharp, cold, and just a little too rehearsed. Oh, but you are. When Willowbrook Estates was incorporated, your property was grandfathered into our covenants. She pulled out a certified letter and shoved it at me like she was serving a warrant. Asterisk, the letter was filled with legal jargon. But the demands were crystal clear. Tear down the barn. Get rid of the chicken coop. Asterisk. Remove the vegetable stand. Asterisk. Eliminate. Unsightly equipment. Asterisk. Failure to comply. $500 a day in fines. Asterisk. My morning coffee suddenly tasted like ash. Asterisk. Property values in our community depend on certain standards, she continued, her arms crossed, her perfume choking the air. Asterisk. But there was something in her eyes, something hungry. It wasn't about standards. It was about my 40 acres. The truth was, most Willowbrook residents didn't agree with her. They liked the farm. They liked the fresh eggs, the tomatoes, the goat that made their kids laugh. But Linda wasn't interested in what they liked. She wanted control. That night, I sat on the porch listening to Daisy chew grass and watching the sun set behind the mountains. I thought about the look Linda gave me when she handed over that letter. It wasn't annoyance. It was calculation. Asterisk. Her husband's construction company. Her sudden obsession with aesthetics, the way she eyed my land like it was already. On a blueprint, it all clicked. Asterisk. This wasn't about chickens or barns. It was about pushing me off the land my grandfather built so they could get their hands on it. Asterisk. And if Linda Walker thought a few threats and fines would scare me into selling. She didn't know me very well. Asterisk. I dealt with criminals, liars, and bullies for 15 years. I'd learned the value of patience, of documentation, of letting people dig their own graves. Asterisk. I set down my empty mug and looked out at the fields, still golden with the last of the evening light. Asterisk. Something told me this fight was just getting started. The morning after Linda's so-called official HOA visit, I unfolded the letter again at the kitchen table. The paper smelled faintly of the floral perfume she bathed in. Legal jargon crawled across the page like ants, but one phrase burned into my brain. $500 a day in fines. Asterisk. I poured another cup of black coffee and thought about my grandfather. He'd spent his life fighting to keep this farm running through droughts, blizzards, and crop failures. And now some woman with a clipboard thought she could erase 80 years of work with a piece of paper. Asterisk. That wasn't happening, asterisk, by Thursday. Linda had escalated. She posted a long rant in the Willowbrook Estates Facebook group. Our community, she wrote, is under siege from unsanitary farm operations that endanger property values and public health. Asterisk. She'd even attached photos of my farm taken with her long-lens camera from angles that made my tidy chicken coop look like a collapsing shack. The post ended with a call for signatures on a petition demanding county action. Asterisk. Within hours. 12 households signed. Out of 47. Not exactly a majority. But Linda paraded the signatures like she'd won an election. Asterisk. I watched from my porch as she walked door to door. High heels sinking into lawns, clutching her manila folder of evidence. Some neighbors looked uncomfortable. Others just signed to get her off their porch. Asterisk. But I also noticed the looks. People glancing toward my farm stand with something like guilt in their eyes. Asterisk. 15 years in law enforcement taught me one thing. Never assume your opponent has done their homework. I drove down to the county courthouse, the smell of old paper and stale coffee hanging in the air, and requested every document related to Willowbrook Estates. Asterisk. I spread them out on a metal table, flipping through yellowed pages until my eyes blurred. That's when I found it buried in subsection 1 to C of the original incorporation. Agreement. Asterisk. Existing agricultural operations shall be permanently exempt from all aesthetic and operational restrictions. Asterisk. Permanently exempt. Asterisk. 2 words that turned Linda's crusade into a sandcastle at high tide. I wanted to go one step further. She wanted to claim my farm was a public health hazard. I'd call her bluff. I contacted the county health department myself. Asterisk. On a crisp Thursday morning. Janet, a no-nonsense inspector who'd been on the job 20 years, walked the property. She poked around the barn, collected soil samples, even checked Daisy's hooves. Asterisk. When she finished, she shook her head and laughed. Mr. Miller, This place is cleaner than half the commercial farms I've inspected. If anything, you exceed organic certification standards. Asterisk, she filed her report that afternoon. My farm, safe, clean, compliant. Asterisk, Linda had just lost her first major battle. But the real twist came a few evenings later. I was closing up the farm stand, the last light fading behind the mountains, when Richard Walker walked over. He wasn't wearing his usual smug grin. Instead, he looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder like Linda might be watching. Asterisk, John said quietly. What would it take for you to sell this place? Asterisk, I raised an eyebrow. Not for sale, Richard. Asterisk, he swallowed hard. 40% above market value. Cash? We'll handle the paperwork. Asterisk, I stared at him. Funny. Your wife says my farm is dragging down property values, yet here you are offering me more money than it's worth. Asterisk, his shoulders sagged. Look, between you and me, Linda, she gets these ideas in her head. She's committed. There's no stopping her. He didn't finish the sentence, but the warning hung in the air. Asterisk. I shook my head. This farm isn't for sale. Not now, not ever. Asterisk, Richard walked back across the property line, defeated. In that moment, everything clicked. This wasn't about barns or chickens. This was about land. My land. Asterisk word spread fast. County. Inspector's clean report, Richard's quiet offer, Linda's failed petition. 3 families who'd signed her sheet withdrew their names, posting online. We signed before we knew the full story. John's farm is part of what makes this community special. Asterisk. Neighbors who'd never stopped by before began visiting the farm stand, buying tomatoes, eggs, and jam. They brought their kids to pet Daisy to see where food actually came from. Asterisk, Linda, meanwhile, grew louder, more desperate, more erratic. She wasn't backing down. But neither was I. From that day on, I treated the situation like a case file. Every conversation with Linda was documented, every threat recorded, every letter copied and filed. Montana's a one-party consent state, and I had no problem using that law to my advantage. Asterisk, Linda wanted to bury me in paperwork and false complaints. Fine, I'd build a paper. Trail strong enough to bury her instead. That night, sitting on the porch with Daisy at my feet and the mountains fading into darkness, I thought about Richard's offer again. Asterisk, 40% above market value. Asterisk, no one pays that unless the land is worth far more to them than it is on paper. Asterisk, my gut told me there was a bigger game at play here. Linda's obsession, Richard's offer, the Tommy Get all smelled like something more than an HOA power trip. Asterisk, and if my years as a deputy taught me anything, it's this. When actions don't match words, follow the money. Asterisk, I didn't know what. Linda and Richard were planning, not yet, but I was going to find out. Asterisk, because this farm wasn't just dirt and buildings. It was my family's story. My grandfather's sweat, my father's blood, and my own second chance at life. Asterisk, and I'd be damned if I let anyone take it away, asterisk. That night I couldn't sleep. The mountains outside my window hidden by clouds and the steady sound of rain tapping the roof. My mind running circles around Richard's strange offer, because people don't throw cash at land unless there's a bigger plan behind it. And I could almost feel Linda's eyes on my farm, even in the dark, like she was plotting her next move. And I wasn't wrong. Because the very next morning, an envelope slid under my gate, not mailed, just shoved there. Inside a formal notice stamped with red ink claiming I was in violation of noise ordinances because my rooster crowed too early. I laughed out loud reading it, imagining Linda standing in her pearls writing it up like some government official. But the truth was uglier. Because attached was a threat of legal action and a so-called signature from neighbors I knew personally, and people who would never agree to such nonsense, which told me Linda had crossed the line from annoying to dangerous. And I drove straight to see Sheriff Collins, an old friend from my deputy days, who leaned back in his chair, read the paper, and sighed, telling me, "John, this isn't the first time Linda's pulled something like this, but she's never forged signatures before," and he promised to make a record of it, which meant if things escalated and I knew I'd have the law on my side. And just as I left the office, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, a neighbor 2 doors down, saying Linda had knocked on her door last night, ranting about how my farm would bring rats into the subdivision. And Sarah told her flat out she buys her eggs from me every week and has never seen a rat on my property. But Linda wouldn't hear it, storming off into the night, her heels echoing like gunshots on the pavement, and all of this should have rattled me. But instead it hardened something in me, because bullies thrive on silence, and I wasn't going to be silent, so I started keeping a small leather notebook in my pocket, writing down dates, times, every encounter, every look she gave me from across the property line. And within days, the pages began to fill, while at the same time I noticed something else. The Walkers had a real estate agent coming by, a slick guy in a tailored suit, walking the edge of their yard with Linda pointing at my farm as if to say, "This is the obstacle." And though I couldn't hear their words, the body language was clear. My farm was the problem standing between them and whatever deal they were cooking up. And the strangest part was how Richard looked. Tired, worn down, like a man who'd been dragged too far into a fight he didn't want. His eyes meeting mine once was something that almost looked like apology. And for a second, I wondered if he might be the weak link in their plan, the one person who could tell me what was really going on. But I didn't push yet. Instead, I doubled down on protecting my farm, putting in new fence posts, cleaning the barn until it gleamed, making sure that no inspector, no officer, no stranger could ever accuse me of neglect, because I knew Linda was watching, always watching, her blinds shifting when I walked past. Her car parked just a little too close to my driveway, and in the middle of all this, one evening, as the sun dropped low and the fields glowed gold, I saw her out there with a camera again, taking pictures of Daisy grazing peacefully, as if a horse in a pasture were some kind of crime. And that's when I realized Linda wasn't going to stop until she either drove me out or got caught crossing a line so big she couldn't talk her way out of it, and I promised myself I'd be ready. The summer heat came early that year, the air heavy with dust from the gravel road and the steady hum of cicadas. And while most folks in Willowbrook were thinking about barbecues and fishing trips, I was thinking about survival, because Linda's war against my farm had taken a new turn. She wasn't just scribbling fake complaints anymore. She was trying to isolate me from the community, and I could feel it each time I walked into town. The sideways glances from people who used to smile, the half-finished conversations when I stepped into the diner, like folks weren't sure if talking to me would put them on Linda's blacklist. And one Saturday morning, I finally understood why. Because as I stood in line at the hardware store, I saw a flyer tacked to the bulletin board. Bold black letters across the top reading "Community Meeting, discussing public nuisance at Miller Farm. Scheduled for the following Tuesday at the Willowbrook Clubhouse," with Linda Walker listed as the organizer, and my blood boiled. But beneath the anger was something else, a cold, sharp edge of clarity. Because if she was stupid enough to drag me into a public forum, then she was also stupid enough to let her lies unravel where everyone could see. And so I spent the next 3 days preparing like I used to before a big case, not just gathering documents, but rehearsing, making sure every fact, every law exemption clause was clear in my head. And when the night of the meeting came, I walked into that clubhouse wearing clean boots, a pressed shirt, and carrying a folder thick with papers, the room buzzing with whispers as Linda stood up front in her pearl necklace, smiling like a politician, and she launched into her speech about property values and health hazards, waving around photos of my barn taken from angles that made shadows look like filth. And then she turned toward the crowd and declared, "If we don't act now, our neighborhood will be overrun," her voice rising high and sharp. And when she finally paused for breath, I stood, calm and steady, holding up the original incorporation agreement for Willowbrook Estates, reading aloud the words that had become my shield. "Existing agricultural operations shall be permanently exempt from all aesthetic and operational restrictions." The room went silent except for the squeak of someone's chair. I let the silence stretch before adding the county health inspector's report that cleared my farm entirely, handing copies to the front row, and then, because I wasn't done, I produced the so-called noise complaint Linda had shoved under my gate, pointing out the forged signatures, reminding the room that forgery is a crime. It's not a community disagreement. And suddenly, the tide turned. People shifting in their seats, whispering, glancing at Linda with doubt in their eyes because the truth has a weight that lies can't carry for long. And when a man in the back tum, a retired teacher, stood up and said, "John's been feeding half our kids fresh eggs for years. And I've never once seen a rat near his place." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then louder, filling the room. And Linda's smile cracked, her face blotching red, her hand tightening on the edge of the podium, and she snapped, "You people don't understand what's at stake." Before storming out, her heels echoing like gunshots on the wood floor, Richard trailing behind her with his eyes down. And as the door slammed shut behind them, I felt something shift. Not victory, not yet, but momentum. The neighbors who had avoided me now came up to shake my hand, to say they were sorry, to ask what they could do. And for the first time since this battle began, I realized I wasn't standing alone. I had allies, real ones. And though I knew Linda wasn't finished, that she would come back meaner and more desperate, I also knew she had shown her hand too soon. And every bully who overplays their hand eventually collapses under the weight of their own lies. So I walked home under the wide Montana sky, Daisy, trotting along the fence line, the stars coming out one by one. And I whispered into the night, "Grandpa, we're holding the line." The days after the meeting felt different, the air lighter somehow. Neighbors stopping by the farm stand, not just to buy eggs, but to show support, dropping off pies, offering to help mend fences. And for the first time since Linda began her crusade, I felt the weight on my shoulders ease. But I also knew it wouldn't last, because Linda wasn't the kind to lick her wounds quietly. She was the type who doubled down when cornered, and sure enough, a week later, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery, the growl of diesel engines carrying across the valley. And when I stepped out onto the porch, I saw trucks parked at the edge of Willowbrook. Men in hard hats unloading surveying equipment. And right there beside them stood Linda, clipboard in hand, pointing at the horizon like some kind of general. And when I walked over to ask what was going on, one of the workers muttered something about a development expansion, new luxury homes to be built on the open fields that bordered my property, and it hit me then. Clear as sunlight, this was never just about chickens or barns. This was about land value. Linda and Richard had lined up a deal with developers, and my farm, sitting right in the middle, was the one obstacle in their way. Suddenly, everything made sense. The fake complaints, the petition, the offer from Richard, it was all part of clearing me out. And my anger turned sharp and steady because I wasn't just fighting an HOA busybody anymore. I was fighting people with money, lawyers, and a future. Profit motive that made me nothing but collateral damage. So I went back to my porch, called Sheriff Collins, and told him exactly what I'd seen, his voice grim on the other end as he said, "John, if developers are involved, you'd better brace yourself. This won't be small-town politics anymore," and I hung up knowing he was right. But I also knew something else. I wasn't the same man I'd been when this started. I had allies now, people who'd seen the truth with their own eyes. And I wasn't about to let Linda rewrite history with bulldozers, so I rallied, visiting neighbors one by one, showing them the development maps I'd requested from the county office, explaining how if my farm fell, theirs would be next, their mountain views gone. Their quiet evenings filled with construction noise, and slowly, I watched the firelight. Up in their eyes, these weren't just folks buying eggs anymore. They were families ready to protect their home. And one evening, we gathered in my barn, a half circle of folding chairs. Daisy poking her head over the stall door as I laid out the plan, every document, every loophole, every right we had under state law. And they listened, nodding, their voices firm when they said they were in, all of them, and it felt like the farm wasn't mine alone anymore. It was a fortress, a symbol, something worth fighting for together. But even as hope grew, so did the storm, because Linda wasn't slowing down. She was at the county office nearly every day, filing motions, lobbying officials, spinning her story about a selfish farmer standing in the way of community progress. And one night, long after sunset, I caught headlights creeping slowly along the road near my barn, a car idling too long, a camera flash cutting through the dark. And though I couldn't make out the driver, my gut told me it was Linda, or someone working for her, building her case. And as Daisy snorted uneasily in the stall, I laid a hand on her mane and whispered, "Easy, girl. They'll have to do a lot more than this to scare us." But in the quiet of that night, I felt something shift. The battle had left the petty stage and entered something far bigger, and I knew the next move would decide everything, because Linda had money and lawyers and her relentless anger. But I had the truth, the law, and now an army of neighbors who were finally ready to stand. Asterisk. The morning of the county hearing broke clear and cold, the kind of Montana morning where your breath hangs in the air and the mountains seem close enough to touch. And as I buttoned my shirt and tied my boots, I felt the weight of generations pressing on me. My grandfather's sweat in the soil, my father's calloused hands in the wood of the barn. And now my own fight to keep it alive, because today wasn't just another skirmish with Linda. It was the day the county would decide whether my farm stood or fell. When I arrived at the courthouse, the lot was already full. Trucks, SUVs, sedans, lined up, and as I walked toward the steps, I realized most of those people weren't here for Linda. They were here for me. Neighbors who had come to stand shoulder to shoulder. Their faces calm but determined. And when I stepped inside the hearing room, I saw Linda at the front, pearls gleaming, lips curled in that tight smile. Richard beside her, looking smaller than ever, and a row of developers in slick suits flipping through binders. But when the gavel struck and the commissioner called the meeting to order, I rose, steady as a stone, and laid out everything. The incorporation documents, the exemption clause, the forged complaint, the inspector's report, even the suspicious. Development plans. My voice carrying across the room, not with anger, but with the calm certainty of a man who knows the truth is on his side. And one by one, the neighbors stood up too. Sarah talking about the eggs her kids ate every morning. Tom reminding the room how a farm connects children to the land. Others telling stories of how my stand brought the community together. And as their words piled up like stones in a wall, I watched Linda's mask begin to crack, her face blotching. Red, her voice shrill as she tried to shout them down, insisting I was a nuisance, a threat, a blight. But the more she screamed, the more she revealed herself. Till finally, the commissioner raised a hand and said firmly, "Enough, Mrs. Walker. We've heard all we need." The room went silent, every eye on the front as the decision was read. And when the words came, they hit like thunder. My farm was legally protected, exempt from all HOA interference, no further complaints would be entertained, and any harassment would be considered unlawful. A ripple of applause spread through the room, neighbors clapping, some even cheering, while Linda slumped in her chair, her pearls suddenly dull. Richard burying his face in his hands, and in that moment, I didn't feel triumph so much as relief. The long, tight knot in my chest finally loosening. When I walked outside, the cold air hit my face like a baptism. And my neighbors surrounded me, clapping me on the back, shaking my hand, promising they had my back for good. That night back at the farm, I leaned on the porch rail, watching Daisy graze under the stars, the barn lights glowing soft, and I whispered to the land, to my family's memory, we did it. We held the line. Because the truth was simple, Linda tried to break me. But in the end, all she did was show this community what we stood to lose. And instead of tearing us apart, she brought us together stronger than ever. Asterisk. And if you've ever faced someone like Linda neighbor, a boss, or anyone who thought they could push you off what's rightfully yours, then you know the feeling of standing your ground, no matter the odds. If you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support keeps these stories alive. And together, we'll keep holding the line. Asterisk.